Thank you, Carla. Be my wife.
What you're watching is video of Bernardo and Karla Homolka on their wedding day in 1991. The couple looked more like brother and sister than they did husband and wife. It was their unintimidating Ken and Barbie look that helped them evade the suspicion of family, friends, their unassuming victims, and even police. So in 1991, nobody could have imagined the skeletons this couple had lying in their closet, nor the bodies of their victims that were being recovered even as they danced. Welcome back to Crime A to Z, where we detail cases and criminals from their very beginning until well after other reporting ends. Today, we'll be talking about the true crime case of Bernardo and Karla Homolka. Behind the scenes, we genuinely had trouble wrapping our heads around the sheer ruthlessness of this couple, especially one crime in particular. This couple is simply and genuinely soulless. So hold on tight and prepare for what's been called Canada's most sensational crime in history. Bernardo grew up in an affluent but deeply unhappy family. His father, Kenneth Bernardo, was the son of an Italian immigrant and had made it big in the marble and tile industry. In 1960, Kenneth met and married his wife and Paul's mother, Marilyn, and the pair settled in Scarborough. However, just weeks after the marriage, cracks began to show in the relationship, culminating in Kenneth being physically abusive to Marilyn. Eventually, the pair went on to have 2 children together, Debbie and Dave. But, as Marilyn slipped into a deep depression, she sought comfort in the arms of another man, someone who she had previously loved but had been blocked from marrying after her family believed him to be beneath her. The affair resulted in Marilyn becoming pregnant, and eventually, on August 27, 1964, after complicated birth, Paul was born. Marilyn remained in the marriage with Kenneth, and the family of 5 lived together in a large middle-class home in Guildwood, east of Toronto. Growing up, Paul was known as a smiley, happy boy. With his mother falling deeper and deeper into depression, she eventually moved into the basement of the home, leaving Kenneth to sleep in the master bedroom alone. Paul and his siblings were often bullied at school for their unwashed clothes and poor hygiene. Looking for an outlet, Paul threw himself into the Boy Scouts and would go on weekend trips away with his peers, learning new skills together. With Marilyn wasting away in her own despair, Kenneth would prowl the streets of Guildwood, peering through the windows of young women, and eventually progressing to a charge of molestation in 1975. Keeping his sadistic behaviors closer to home, Kenneth began sexually assaulting his daughter, Debbie. The abuse wasn't a secret. Paul, his brother Dave and Marilyn all knew about the abuse, even witnessing it on occasion. When Paul was 15, an argument between him and his parents resulted in the nature of his birth finally being revealed. Once the secret was out in the open, Marilyn began tormenting Paul, calling him the bastard child from hell, and blaming him for how her life turned out. Paul, having had his entire life turned around, did not take the revelation well. He tried desperately to fit in with his peers at school, and went to great lengths to hide the depravity he faced at home. By the next summer, Paul got a job as a camp counselor and impressed his employers with how kind he was to the young children he cared for. But Paul was hiding a secret of his own. For years he had been collecting pornography and had become obsessed with what he had seen. Following in his father's footsteps, he too had begun stalking the streets and peering into windows, trying to catch a glimpse of women undressing. After leaving high school, Paul enrolled at the University of Toronto, where he studied accountancy. During his time there, Paul was popular with young women and would regularly be seen on dates around the campus. However, Paul had a dark sexual appetite. The women he slept with were subjected to scripted, violent sex, sodomy at knife point, and strangulation, all at Paul's insistence. As each relationship came to an end, Paul would simply brush himself off and find his next partner, a revolving door of women he would use and abuse in order to satisfy himself. After graduating college, Paul began working at Price Waterhouse as a junior accountant. Not one to settle down, Paul went back to his old ways, stalking the streets to find women. Except this time, instead of peering at them through the darkness, he would rape them. On May 4, 1987, while a young woman was getting off a bus near her parents' house, Paul grabbed and brutally raped her. There would be 2 other assaults of this nature in the next week alone. Authorities came to the conclusion that the attacks, which all involved beatings, severe verbal abuse, and ominous threats to deter victims from contacting the police, had all been carried out by the same man, who the newspapers swiftly dubbed the Scarborough Rapist. The women were all between the ages of 15 and 21. In October 1987, with multiple assaults under his belt, Paul met his match in a hotel bar one night, 17-year-old Carla Homolka. Born in Ontario on May 4, 1970, Carla was the daughter of Czechoslovak immigrant Karla Homolka and his wife, Dorothy. With 2 sisters, Lori and Tammy, Carla was known for being pretty, popular, and clever. She was a straight-A student with a promising future. But as she grew up, things went awry. In high school, Carla began acting out, not listening to teachers, and falling out with friends. She would frequently lie about suicide attempts and cut herself in a bid for attention. Carla began working as a vet assistant at a veterinary clinic during high school. And as soon as she graduated, she was hired on as a full-time veterinary technician. In October 1987, 17-year-old Carla attended a pet store conference in Scarborough and was staying with a friend at a Howard Johnson hotel. It was there that she met 23-year-old Paul, and the pair immediately hit it off. After chatting for a while, the pair went upstairs and slept with each other. From that night on, they were inseparable. Paul would visit Carla as often as he could. In the weeks after they began dating, Paul became increasingly controlling over Carla, telling her how to dress, what she could or couldn't eat, and even calling her ugly and not worthy of him. Unlike the women he dated in college, Carla didn't run. In fact, she encouraged his depraved sexual behavior, submitting to his dark desires. When Paul found out Carla wasn't a virgin when they met, he was enraged. Despite the fact that he wasn't either, he was furious that the object of his obsession didn't solely belong to him. Despite this, Paul decided to continue the relationship. But he wasn't willing to give up his secret life as a rapist. Instead, he brought Carla into the fold. One day Paul asked her what she would do if he was a rapist. When Carla responded that she thought that it was cool, he returned to the streets within days, capturing and assaulting women with Carla in tow. Paul would hide out at various bus stops, waiting for an easy victim to walk past. When they did, he would grab and rape them, usually in bushes. By the end of 1988, he had assaulted or attempted to assault over 13 women, occasionally bringing Carla along to watch. Police desperately tried to solve the case of the Scarborough rapist, collecting evidence from each victim and drawing a composite sketch which they would share among other police departments in the country. Paul was questioned over the rapes twice, but let go with no further action. Getting away with it motivated Paul to carry on his heinous crime spree. By 1990, Paul had lost his job and begun smuggling cigarettes in order to make ends meet. It was during this time that Paul became obsessed with Carla's 15-year-old sister, Tammy. He would sneak into her room while visiting Carla's parents. Now engaged, the Homolkas took Paul in with open arms, adoring the man Carla had chosen to be her husband. But in the dead of night, Paul would sneak into Tammy's room and masturbate while she slept. In July of that year, Paul expressed to Karla that since it was impossible for her to give him her virginity, he should take Tammy's. Instead of recoiling in horror, Karla agreed and the two made plans for Paul to rape Tammy, telling him it would be his Christmas present. On July 24, 1990, Karla set their plan into motion, lacing Tammy's food with Valium that she'd stolen from the veterinarian office where she worked. With Tammy asleep, Paul crept into the room, ready to attack. However, the dosage wasn't strong enough, and Tammy woke up just seconds before Paul could attack. Undeterred, they struck again on December 23rd, spiking Tammy's drink with sleeping pills, to the point of almost overdosing her. Not wanting his plan to fail, as soon as Tammy fell asleep, the pair worked together to undress her, while holding a rag soaked in anesthetics over her mouth to keep her from waking up. Both of them then proceeded to rape Tammy, laughing as they committed the heinous act against Karla's own sister. After the attack, Tammy began to vomit and stopped breathing, choking on her own vomit. The couple made some attempts to revive her, but it was no use. They had unwittingly killed Karla's younger sister. Panicking, the pair moved quickly to cover up their crime, dressing Tammy and cleaning up any evidence. Once everything had been cleaned and returned to how it was, they called 911. Emergency services soon arrived, but there was nothing that could be done. Tammy was pronounced dead. Her death was ruled accidental due to overconsumption of alcohol, but it was noted that she had sustained chemical burns to her face. No further investigation was made.
Oh, you pressed no.
Okay. Whoa, that's so cute. Zoom close up. Whoa! Crack lens. Whoa!
Relieved that they'd seemingly gotten away with their unplanned murder, the pair laughed and joked at her funeral. Paul stroked Tammy's hair as she lay in her casket, and sickeningly, the couple put a photo of themselves next to her body before she was buried. After Tammy's death, the pair rented a home together in Port Dalhousie. Here they would reenact 15-year-old Tammy's rape and murder, adding it to their sadistic sexual role-playing. When Paul drank, he would berate Karla, blaming her for her sister's death and telling her that she had stolen Tammy from him. To make up for it, they sought out their next victim. On June 7, 1991, Karla invited a teenager she met at work over to the couple's home. After chatting with Karla and Paul for a while, the teen known only as Jane Doe passed out. Her drink had been laced with triazolam, a fast-acting sedative. At this point, Karla presented the sleeping teenager to Paul, telling him that she was a surprise gift for their upcoming wedding. As Jane Doe slept, the couple raped her, filming themselves in the act. The next day, the teen woke up and left the home, not realizing what she had been subjected to the previous night. Just days later, on June 15th, Paul met 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey in Burlington after he'd driven there with the intention of stealing license plates to use for his cigarette smuggling activities. Leslie had missed her curfew by just minutes after attending a funeral and had been locked out of her home as a result. Unable to find anywhere else to sleep, Leslie walked the streets. During her wandering, Paul approached her and told her he was on his way to break into someone's house. Leslie simply asked him if he had a cigarette and offered to accompany him on his burglary. On the way back to his car, Paul grabbed Leslie, blindfolded her, and forced her into the back of his car. Once home, Paul shouted to Karla to come and see their new plaything, and the pair dragged the terrified 14-year-old inside. Inside, the pair recorded themselves torturing Leslie. With Bob Marley and David Bowie music playing in the background, the pair brutalized her. Paul taunted her, saying, "You're doing a good job, Leslie, a damned good job. The next 2 hours are going to determine what I do to you. Right now, you're scoring perfectly." Still blindfolded, Leslie screamed out in pain, desperate for the attack to end, and begging for them to let her go. The next day, the couple decided it was possible that the teen could recognize them, so they concluded she needed to die. She was given a lethal dose of triazolam and strangled by Paul. Once dead, they moved her body to the basement and would later set about dismembering the teenager. Encasing her in cement, her body was dumped in Lake Gibson. On June 29, 1991, the same day Paul and Karla were married, Leslie's body was discovered off the shore of the lake by a father and son who were out fishing. Authorities were called, and Leslie was identified by her dental records. Not yet tied to the Scarborough rapist, police opened a murder investigation. During the year following their wedding, Karla invited numerous young girls to the house, and the couple would drug and rape them repeatedly, usually recording the attacks. They all survived the attacks, but had no memory of them. Then April 16, 1992, the couple abducted 15-year-old Kristen French as she left school. Kristen was held hostage for 3 days by the couple. Raped and tortured, with the promise that Paul gave her that she would be freed, Kristen initially stayed calm, hoping that she would be able to escape. However, as the abuse went on, Kristen became more defiant, calling Paul a bastard. Seeing red and remembering what his mother called him, he beat Kristen with a rubber mallet, strangling her for 7 minutes and not stopping until she was dead. Like they did for Leslie, the pair began taking steps to cover up the crime. They cut Kristen's hair, washed her and threw her body in a ditch over 50 kilometers, or 30 miles, away in Burlington. The bodies of Leslie and Kristen were discovered fairly close together, and police soon realized the murders were connected. After interviewing witnesses who had seen Kristen being kidnapped, a sketch of the killer was released, and an alarming connection was finally made. He looked exactly the same as the Scarborough rapist. Realizing the two crimes were connected, the press quickly picked up on the case and tips flooded in. Many tips claimed that the man in the sketch resembled Paul Bernardo. Colleagues and friends rang in with their concerns, and Paul was soon brought in for questioning. Despite his DNA having been gathered years ago for the rape cases, it was never actually tested. And given the backlog, it still would not be tested for some more months. So it wasn't his DNA that would be Paul's undoing. It was his wife. On January 6, 1993, less than 2 years after the pair was married, Karla was brought into the emergency room at St. Catherine's General Hospital after having been beaten by Paul. She had sustained a broken wrist and had been beaten so severely that her eyes were black and she couldn't see or walk properly. Paul was arrested for assault but was released on bail. After being treated, Karla sought refuge with her family in Brampton. There, she confided to her family that she knew the Scarborough rapist and the schoolgirl murderer. It was Paul. Shocked, Karla's family convinced her that she needed to report everything to the police. Despite her own hand in most of the crimes Paul committed, she knew her best way out of this was to confess and hope for a plea bargain. In February 1993, Karla went to the police requesting immunity for her confession. While negotiations were underway, Paul was arrested and a search warrant was executed on the couple's home. Inside, detectives found their horrific home videos along with a selection of books and movies on pornography and serial killers. Once the police discovered the items in the home, Karla's request for immunity was denied. Instead, she was offered 12 years imprisonment under a manslaughter charge, instead of facing up to 3 murder charges. If she accepted the plea deal, she would likely be released in just 3 short years for good behavior. Karla agreed and detailed everything she knew to the police: the rapes, the stalking, and the murders of her sister and 2 other teenage girls. She cooperated fully with the investigation, digging Paul's grave. A month later, in March 1993, before her trial began, Karla was admitted into a psychiatric hospital. There, she wrote to her family,
Dear Mom, Dad, and Lori. This is the hardest letter I've ever had to write, and you'll probably all hate me once you read it. I've kept this inside myself for so long, and I just can't lie to you anymore. Both Paul and I are responsible for Tammy's death. Paul was in love with her and wanted to have sex with her. He wanted me to help him. He wanted me to get sleeping pills from work to drug her with. He threatened me and physically and emotionally abused me when I refused. No words I can say can make you understand what he put me through. So as stupidly, I agreed to do as he said. But something, maybe the combination of drugs and the food she ate that night, caused her to vomit. I tried so hard to save her. I am so sorry. But no words I can say can bring her back. I would gladly give my life for hers. I don't expect you to ever forgive me, for I will never forgive myself.
The press went wild with the story dubbed the Ken and Barbie killers. The media attention surrounding the case was unprecedented. On trial in June 1993, Karla received the sentence offered during plea negotiations and was sentenced to serve her 12-year term at Kingston Prison for Women. Paul's trial took place 2 years later in May 1995. After his arrest, Paul consistently challenged the claims made against him. He denied the crimes in police interviews and attempted to place all the blame on his wife. But once the pair's videotapes documenting their crimes were aired in court, his claims didn't hold water. During Karla's trial, the public had been made to believe that she was a battered wife and unwilling accomplice.
Being physically and verbally abusive to me at that time, as you know. He kept on pushing and pushing and pushing, and finally I said okay, and thinking that it wouldn't be, it would just be one time, that's it. It would shut him up, and he would stop bothering me and stop hurting me. If I didn't turn the water tap off completely, he'd hit me. If I didn't say the right thing, he'd hit me. He held knives to my throat. He told me I better watch my back. He said, always watch your back with me.
But once the contents of the videotapes were revealed during Paul's trial, it became undeniably clear that Karla was not only a willing, but eager and active participant in the rapes, beatings, and murders. Public outrage across the country regarding the plea bargain was swift. Many felt that the prosecution had made a deal with the devil. Many also noted how the killings didn't begin until after Karla became involved, and even speculated that she may have been the one who wanted the victims killed out of jealousy. But none of that mattered. It was too late. During Paul's trial, various unidentified women who had been attacked or escaped from Paul described their experiences. The prosecution stated that they could not say without a doubt that all victims had been identified and that there may still be more out there. On September 1, 1995, Paul Bernardo was convicted of over 30 charges relating to the kidnappings, rapes, and murders. He was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Karla was released in 2005 and has since remarried Terry Bordelais, her former lawyer's brother. Living under the name Leanne Teal, she lives in Quebec with she and Terry's 3 children. A Facebook page called Watching Carla Homolka was set up, which tracks her movements around the city. In an interview since her release, she said, "At the time, I was 17 years old, I lacked knowledge, I feared being abandoned, I was desperate for a relationship, I lacked confidence, there are numerous aspects of myself that I was unaware of at the time but am now aware of." As of the making of this video in 2022, Paul is still in prison serving at Millhaven Penitentiary in Eastern Ontario. By February 2018, Bernardo met the requirements for parole. He's made 2 requests for parole since then, and both have been denied. His most recent request for parole was made in June 2021. Paul's plea was denied after just 1 hour of deliberation by the presiding judge. Paul argued his case by saying that he had been without meaningful human contact for more than 10,000 days and that this had left him feeling stressed and anxious. He affirmed that he was a changed person, and he ironically characterized his punishment as cruel and inhumane. "I am no longer preoccupied with fantasies," Paul said in his parole application. "Without a doubt, I'm low risk. I have fought all deviant sexual behavior for 2 years." After just 30 minutes, his parole was denied. And today, Paul spends most of the day confined in his cell, with 1 hour of solitary yard time. Paul is reported to have no meaningful human interaction with other inmates or guards, and the only thing he has to keep himself company are the letters he gets from his disillusioned admirers. In his own words, "I cry all the time." Thank you so much for watching. We hope this video did justice to all the young victims of this heartless couple's crimes. We find it both ironic and perfectly fitting that Paul feels he's being treated inhumanely. And we only wish Karla could have shared in more of that inhumanity. We also can't shake the level of selfishness and callousness that has to be involved to agree to and participate in the drugging and rape of your very own sister. May Tammy's soul rest in peace, and we'll leave it up to you in the comments to share what you think the fate of the couple should be or should have been. And as usual, if you want to see more videos like this one, please be sure to hit like and definitely hit subscribe so you never miss a single video.